The November evening air in Nashville carried the crisp smell of approaching winter, mixing with the lingering scent of hot cider and roasted pecans from the vendors outside the Ryman Auditorium. The historic venue, often called the Mother Church of Country Music, glowed under warm lights as fans filed out after Reba McEntire's benefit concert for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Their voices echoed through the brick-paved streets, singing fragments of songs they had just heard, their breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Wikipedia +1. Inside the backstage area, Reba sat at a long table in the green room, her signature red hair catching the overhead lights as she smiled warmly at each fan who approached. At 70 years old, she still had that spark in her eyes, that genuine connection that had made her the queen of country music for over 4 decades. She wore a burgundy blazer over a simple black top, comfortable jeans, and her favorite boots. No pretense, no distance between her and the people who had supported her throughout her extraordinary career. Wikipedia, thank you so much for coming tonight, she said to an elderly couple signing their vintage album cover. This one takes me back. I was just a kid when I recorded these songs. The woman beamed. You've been the soundtrack of our marriage, Reba. 42 years and counting. Reba placed her hand over her heart. That's the sweetest thing I've heard all day. God bless you both. Her assistant, Kelly Preston, stood nearby with a clipboard, keeping track of the time. They had been at this for nearly an hour, and Reba showed no signs of fatigue. She never did when it came to connecting with her fans. Kelly had worked with Reba for 6 years and had witnessed countless moments like these, but she never ceased to be amazed by Reba's authentic warmth and patience. The line dwindled as the clock approached 10:30. The venue staff had started dimming some of the lights in the corridors, and the sound of chairs being stacked echoed from the auditorium. That's when Kelly noticed a young woman standing at the back of the remaining line, clutching a manila envelope to her chest. She looked different from the other fans, more anxious, less excited. Her scrubs were visible beneath her open jacket, and her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail that suggested she had come straight from work. Rachel Bennett had been standing in that line for 45 minutes, rehearsing what she would say. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the envelope containing her grandmother's letter. She had almost talked herself out of coming at least a dozen times. Who was she to take up Reba McEntire's time with such a personal request? But then she thought of Dorothy, lying in that hospital bed at home, her breathing shallow, her time running out. This wasn't about Rachel's comfort. This was about her grandmother's last wish. When Rachel finally reached the table, Reba looked up with that same warm smile she had given everyone else. "Hi there, sweetheart. Thank you for waiting. What's your name?" "Rachel. Rachel Bennett." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Ms. McEntire, I know you must be exhausted, and I promise I won't take much of your time." Reba's expression shifted slightly, her intuition telling her this was different from the typical autograph request. She leaned forward, giving Rachel her full attention. "Take all the time you need, honey. What's on your mind?" Rachel's eyes began to well up, but she fought back the tears. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. "I'm a hospice nurse at a live hospice here in Nashville," she began, her voice steadying as she focused on her purpose. "I've been taking care of my grandmother, Dorothy Daniels, for the past 8 months. She's 82 years old, and she's in the final stages of congestive heart failure. A live hospice." Reba's hand moved instinctively across the table, not quite touching Rachel's, but close enough to offer comfort. "I'm so sorry, Rachel." "Thank you." Rachel took a breath and continued. "My grandmother has been your biggest fan since 1983. She used to play your albums on repeat when I was growing up. She taught me every word to fancy. And the night the lights went out in Georgia. Music was always her escape, especially after my grandfather passed away 15 years ago. Reba nodded, understanding the profound role music could play in people's lives. It was why she did what she did. Grandma Dorothy always dreamed of seeing you perform live, but life never made it easy for her. She raised 4 kids mostly on her own while working 2 jobs. Money was always tight. By the time things got a little easier, her health started failing. Rachel paused, gathering her courage for what came next. She's been unconscious more than awake these past few days. But last week, during one of her lucid moments, she asked me if I could bring her to one of your concerts before she passed. The emotion in Rachel's voice was palpable now, despite her best efforts. Behind her, Kelly Preston discreetly wiped her own eyes. I tried to get tickets for tonight's show, Rachel continued. But by the time I got paid and could afford them, everything was sold out. I even called the box office to explain the situation, but there was nothing they could do. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. So, I told Grandma Dorothy I would try to give you this letter she wrote. She dictated it to me 3 days ago, and I helped her sign it. It took her almost 20 minutes because her hands shake so much now. Rachel held out the envelope. Reba took it with both hands, treating it like the precious thing it was. The envelope was slightly worn at the edges, and Rachel's neat handwriting on the front read, "To Reba McEntire, with love and gratitude from Dorothy Daniels." "May I read it now?" Reba asked softly. "Of course. That's why I'm here." Reba carefully opened the envelope and pulled out 2 sheets of lined notebook paper. The handwriting on the first page was Rachel's, clear and measured. But at the bottom of the second page was Dorothy's shaky signature, written with obvious effort and determination. Reba began to read silently, but as she did, her expression changed. The professional smile faded, replaced by something deeper and more personal. The letter read, "Dear Reba, my name is Dorothy Daniels, and I am 82 years old. I am writing this letter because my granddaughter Rachel tells me I should never give up on dreams, even the small ones, even at the end. I have loved your music since I first heard Can't Even Get the Blues on the radio in 1983. My husband, James, had just lost his job at the factory, and we were scared about how we would feed our 4 children. I was working as a waitress at a diner on Gallatin Pike, pulling double shifts, and my feet hurt so bad I could barely stand. But when your songs came on the jukebox, something inside me felt stronger. Your voice reminded me that I could survive anything. Over the years, your music has been there for every important moment in my life. When James died in 2010, I played The Greatest Man I Never Knew at his funeral. When my daughter left her babies with me to raise, I listened to Is There Life Out There? And reminded myself that hard times don't last forever. When Rachel graduated from nursing school, the first person in our family to go to college, we celebrated by dancing in the kitchen to Fancy. I never got to see you in concert. There was always something. Bills to pay, kids to raise, health problems to deal with. I told myself I would make it happen one day, but now my days are numbered. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe less. I don't expect anything from you, Reba. You have given me so much already through your music. But Rachel insisted I write this letter because she believes in miracles. And she says sometimes miracles are just people being kind to each other. If you ever read this, please know that your voice has been the soundtrack of my life. You helped me survive the worst times and celebrate the best ones. You made me feel less alone. For a woman like me, who never had much, your music was everything. Thank you for every song, every note, every word. You will always be my queen of country. With all my love and gratitude, Dorothy Daniels. When Reba finished reading, she sat still for a long moment, staring at the letter. The backstage area had gone quiet. Even the venue staff who had been cleaning up had paused in their work, sensing something significant was happening. Finally, Reba looked up at Rachel. Her eyes were moist, but her voice was steady. "Where does your grandmother live, Rachel?" Rachel was surprised by the question. "We live in Madison, about 20 minutes from here. It's a small house on Neely's Bend Road." "Is she at home or in a hospital?" "At home. I set up a hospital bed in the living room so she can look out at the garden she planted. Hospice comes twice a week, but I'm there most of the time. I switched to part-time at work so I could take care of her." Reba folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then she looked at Kelly. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon." Kelly's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "Consider it done." Reba turned back to Rachel. "Would it be all right if I came to visit your grandmother tomorrow? I'd like to sing for her." Rachel's mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared at Reba, trying to process what she had just heard. I don't. Are you serious?" "As serious as a heart attack, honey." Reba smiled gently. "Your grandmother's letter touched my heart. The least I can do is spend a little time with a woman who has supported me for over 40 years. If Dorothy wants to hear me sing, then I'm going to sing for her." Tears streamed down Rachel's face now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "Ms. McEntire, I don't know what to say. This would mean everything to her. Everything. You don't have to say anything." Reba stood up and walked around the table. She pulled Rachel into a warm hug, the kind that only a woman who understands loss and love can give. "What time works best for you tomorrow?" Rachel pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Grandma Dorothy is usually most alert around 2 in the afternoon. That's when the pain medication has worn off enough for her to be present, but not so much that she's in agony." 2 o'clock it is." Reba squeezed Rachel's hands. "Give Kelly your address and phone number. We'll call before we come, just to make sure it's still a good time." As Rachel gave her information to Kelly, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. When she finished, she turned back to Reba one more time. "Ms. McEntire, I don't know how to thank you for this. My grandmother has been through so much in her life. She deserves this moment of joy. We all deserve moments of joy, Rachel. And call me Reba, please." She walked Rachel toward the exit, her arm around the younger woman's shoulders. "How are you holding up? Taking care of a dying loved one is one of the hardest things anyone can do." Rachel's smile was sad but genuine. "Some days are harder than others. But Grandma Dorothy raised me when my own mother couldn't. She gave me everything. The least I can do is make sure she's comfortable and loved in her final days. You're a good granddaughter and a good person." Reba paused at the door. "Try to get some rest tonight. Tomorrow's going to be a special day." After Rachel left, Kelly turned to Reba with an expression of both admiration and concern. "That was incredibly generous of you. But you have the photo shoot for People magazine at 11? Lunch with the ACM board at noon, and a production meeting for Happy's Place at 4. Reba waved her hand dismissively. "Reschedule the photo shoot and send my apologies to the ACM board. The production meeting can wait an hour. This is more important. You know the magazine will charge a fee for rescheduling. Then they charge a fee. Kelly, did you hear that letter? Did you see that young woman's face? That grandmother has been listening to my music for 42 years. She raised 4 kids, mostly alone. She's dying. If I can give her one good memory before she leaves this world, then nothing else on my schedule matters." Kelly smiled. She had learned long ago that when Reba McEntire decided to do something from the heart, there was no point in arguing. It was one of the things she admired most about her boss. "I'll make the calls first thing in the morning. Thank you." Reba looked down at the envelope in her hands. You know, I get hundreds of letters every week. People share their stories, their pain, their joy. And I read as many as I can because it reminds me why I do this. But every once in a while, a letter comes along that just... She trailed off, searching for the right words. Breaks your heart in the best way possible? Kelly offered. Exactly. Reba tucked the letter carefully into her bag. My mama always told me that talent is a gift, but what you do with it is your choice. I choose to use mine to make people feel less alone, even if it's just for 3 minutes of a song. Tomorrow, I get to make one woman very happy. That's worth more than any photo shoot or board meeting. As they walked out into the cold Nashville night, Reba thought about Dorothy Daniels. She thought about all the women like Dorothy who had worked multiple jobs, raised children under impossible circumstances, and found solace in music. These were the people who had made her career possible. These were the voices that had lifted her up when the industry tried to push her down. And now, one of those voices was fading, but Reba had a chance to give something back. That night, as Rachel drove home through the quiet streets of Nashville, she could barely believe what had just happened. She pulled into the driveway of the small yellow house on Neely's Bend Road and sat in the car for a moment, gathering herself. Inside, Dorothy was sleeping, watched over by Patricia Whitmore, a hospice volunteer who came 3 evenings a week to give Rachel a break. Rachel walked in quietly. Patricia looked up from her book and smiled. How was the concert? Life-changing, Rachel whispered. She walked over to Dorothy's bedside and looked down at her grandmother's peaceful face. The oxygen tube rested in her nose, and her breathing was shallow but steady. Grandma, Rachel said softly, even though she knew Dorothy couldn't hear her. Tomorrow, you're going to meet Reba McEntire. She's coming here, to our home, to sing for you. I don't know how I managed to make this happen, but I did. You're finally going to meet your hero. Patricia's eyes widened in surprise, but she stayed quiet, respecting the sacred moment between grandmother and granddaughter. Rachel kissed Dorothy's forehead gently. Hold on until tomorrow, Grandma. Just one more day. Then you can let go if you need to. But please, let me give you this one beautiful gift before you leave me. Outside, the November wind rustled through the bare branches of the oak tree in the front yard, and the moon cast silver light across the garden that Dorothy had tended for 35 years. Inside the small yellow house, 2 women kept vigil, one young and hopeful, one old and fading, connected by love and the promise of a miracle that would arrive with the afternoon sun. Rachel woke up at 6 in the morning after barely 3 hours of sleep. She had stayed awake most of the night, sitting in the chair beside Dorothy's bed, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her grandmother's chest, praying that she would make it to 2 o'clock. Every few hours, she checked Dorothy's vitals, administered medication, and adjusted the pillows to keep her comfortable. Patricia had left at midnight, squeezing Rachel's shoulder encouragingly before heading home. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the living room, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. The house was small but impeccably clean, a testament to Dorothy's lifelong insistence on taking pride in what little they had. Family photos covered every available surface. Rachel's nursing school graduation, Dorothy and James on their wedding day in 1963, Rachel's mother as a little girl before addiction had stolen her away. Rachel made coffee in the kitchen, her mind racing with preparations. The house needed to be ready for Reba McEntire. Not perfect. Rachel knew Dorothy wouldn't want her to pretend they were something they weren't, but presentable. She looked around at the peeling linoleum, the refrigerator held together with duct tape, the cabinet door that hung slightly crooked. This was their reality, and there was no hiding it. Dorothy stirred around 7:30, making soft sounds of discomfort. Rachel was at her side immediately, checking the morphine pump that helped manage her grandmother's pain. "Good morning, Grandma. How are you feeling?" Dorothy's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with age and illness, but there was still a spark of recognition when she saw Rachel's face. "Baby girl," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak. "You look tired." "I'm fine, Grandma. Don't worry about me." Rachel adjusted the oxygen tubing and helped Dorothy take a few sips of water. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm and save your energy, okay?" Dorothy nodded slightly, confused but trusting. Rachel took her grandmother's frail hand, feeling the paper-thin skin and prominent veins. "Last night, after the concert, I gave Reba McEntire the letter you wrote, the one we worked on together last week." Dorothy's eyes widened slightly, and Rachel saw a flicker of concern. She knew her grandmother was probably worried that Rachel had embarrassed herself or wasted Reba's time. "Grandma, Reba read your letter, and she cried. She cried because your words touched her heart." Rachel's own voice broke with emotion. "And then she asked me where you lived because she wants to come here today. She's coming at 2 o'clock to visit you and sing for you." For a moment, Dorothy just stared at Rachel, not comprehending. Then, slowly, tears began to roll down her weathered cheeks. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. Finally, in barely more than a breath, she said, "Reba McEntire is coming here? To our house?" "Yes, Grandma. She's coming to meet you and to sing for you, just like you always dreamed." Dorothy's thin hand gripped Rachel's with surprising strength. "I must look terrible. My hair. We'll fix your hair, I promise. But Grandma, you need to save your strength. The visit is 7 hours away. I need you to rest now so you can be awake this afternoon." Dorothy nodded, but her eyes remained bright with anticipation. For the first time in weeks, Rachel saw something other than resignation in her grandmother's expression. She saw hope, excitement, joy, emotions Rachel had thought were lost forever beneath the weight of illness and approaching death. Over the next several hours, Rachel threw herself into preparations. She vacuumed the worn carpet, dusted every surface, and washed the windows until they gleamed. She arranged fresh flowers from the garden in Dorothy's favorite vase, the last brave chrysanthemums that had survived the first frost. She baked Dorothy's recipe for pecan cookies, filling the house with the warm, sweet smell of home. At 11 o'clock, the phone rang. Rachel's heart jumped, terrified it might be Kelly calling to cancel. But when she answered, Kelly's voice was warm and reassuring. "Good morning, Rachel. I'm calling to confirm that we're still on for 2 o'clock. How is Dorothy this morning?" "She's resting, but she's alert. She knows Reba is coming, and I think the anticipation is keeping her going." "That's wonderful. Is there anything special we should bring? Any particular songs Dorothy loves?" Rachel thought for a moment. "She's always loved Fancy and The Greatest Man I Never Knew. But honestly, I think anything Reba sings will make her happy." "Perfect. We'll see you at 2. And Rachel, Reba asked me to tell you not to worry about anything. She just wants to meet Dorothy and share some time with her. No fuss necessary." After the call, Rachel checked on Dorothy again. Her grandmother was awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression of quiet wonder. "I keep thinking I'm dreaming," Dorothy whispered. "Things like this don't happen to people like us." Rachel sat on the edge of the hospital bed, careful not to jostle her grandmother. "Why not us, Grandma? You've spent your whole life taking care of other people. Your kids, your grandkids, the people at the diner where you worked for 30 years. You deserve something beautiful. I just wish I looked better. Wish I was younger, healthier. Wish I could put on a nice dress and do my hair proper. You're beautiful exactly as you are, Grandma. But if you want, I can help you with your hair and put on your favorite cardigan. Would that make you feel better?" Dorothy smiled weakly. "The blue one. James always said I looked pretty in blue." At 1 o'clock, Rachel helped Dorothy wash up and change into a clean nightgown. Then, with gentle hands, she brushed her grandmother's thin white hair and arranged it neatly. She helped her into the soft blue cardigan that James had given her for their 40th anniversary. Dorothy was exhausted by the effort, but she looked more like herself than she had in weeks. There was color in her cheeks. Whether from excitement or fever, Rachel couldn't tell. But she chose to believe it was excitement. "You look beautiful, Grandma." "I look like an old woman dying in her living room," Dorothy said. But there was a hint of humor in her voice. "You look like a woman who's about to meet the queen of country music." At 1:45, Rachel heard a car pull into the driveway. Her heart began to race. She looked out the window and saw a modest SUV, not a limousine or tour bus. Reba McEntire stepped out wearing jeans, boots, and a simple cream-colored sweater. Her red hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she carried a guitar case. Kelly emerged from the driver's side, carrying a large bag. Rachel opened the door before they could knock. "You're early," she said, smiling nervously. "I hope that's okay," Reba said warmly. "I was too excited to wait. I've been thinking about Dorothy all night. Please, come in." Rachel stepped aside, suddenly hyper-aware of every imperfection in their home. But Reba walked in with no judgment in her eyes, only kindness. "What a lovely home," Reba said, looking around at the photos and the flowers. "You can feel the love here." Dorothy's voice came weakly from the living room. "Is that her? Is that Reba?" Reba's face lit up. She handed the guitar case to Kelly and walked into the living room, moving slowly so as not to startle Dorothy. When she reached the hospital bed, she knelt down so she was at eye level with the elderly woman. "Hello, Dorothy," Reba said softly. "It's so wonderful to meet you." Dorothy stared at Reba, tears streaming down her face. Her mouth trembled as she tried to speak. Finally, she managed, "You're really here. You're really in my house." "I really am. And I brought my guitar because I hear you like my music." Reba gently took Dorothy's hand. "I read your letter, Dorothy. Every word. It was one of the most beautiful things anyone has ever written to me." "I meant every word," Dorothy whispered. "You don't know what your music has meant to me. All those years, all those hard times. Your voice made me feel less alone." Reba's eyes glistened with tears. "That's the greatest compliment anyone can give me. Music is supposed to connect us, remind us we're not alone in this world. The fact that my songs did that for you means I've done my job right." Rachel stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, trying not to sob. Kelly stood beside her, equally moved by the scene unfolding before them. Reba looked around and noticed the photos on the side table. "Is this you and your husband?" Dorothy nodded. "James. We were married 47 years. He was the greatest man I never knew. Just like your song says. Worked himself to death trying to take care of us. He sounds like he was a good man. I bet he would be proud of you, Dorothy. Proud of everything you accomplished. Everything you survived. I hope so. I tried my best." Dorothy's breathing was becoming labored, and Rachel stepped forward, concerned. "Grandma, maybe you should rest a minute." But Dorothy shook her head stubbornly. "No, I want to hear Reba sing. I've waited my whole life for this. I can rest after." Reba squeezed Dorothy's hand. "Then let me get my guitar. What would you like to hear first?" "Fancy. That's always been my favorite. Made me feel strong when I needed strength." Reba stood and took the guitar from Kelly, settling into the chair beside Dorothy's bed. She tuned the guitar quickly, the familiar movements of someone who had been playing for over 5 decades. Then, in the small living room of a modest house in Madison, Tennessee, Reba McEntire began to sing. Her voice filled the room, rich and powerful, even without amplification. She sang the story of a girl from the wrong side of town who refused to accept the limitations placed on her by birth and circumstance. Dorothy closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, her lips moving along with the words she had memorized decades ago. Rachel watched her grandmother's face transform. The pain lines seemed to soften, and for a few minutes, Dorothy wasn't an 82-year-old woman dying of heart failure. She was young again, standing in that diner on Gallatin Pike, drawing strength from a song on the jukebox, believing she could survive anything. When Reba finished, there was a moment of profound silence. Then Dorothy opened her eyes and said, "Thank you. Oh, thank you. That was more beautiful than I ever imagined." "What else would you like to hear?" Reba asked gently. "The Greatest Man I Never Knew. I played it at James's funeral. It was the hardest day of my life, but that song helped me say goodbye." Reba nodded, understanding. She began to play the gentle melody, and her voice took on a different quality. Softer, more intimate, carrying the weight of loss and love remembered. Dorothy listened with her eyes closed, holding onto Rachel's hand on one side and Reba's on the other, connected by music and shared understanding of what it means to love and lose. For the next hour, Reba sang song after song. She sang the hits Dorothy requested, and some deeper cuts from albums Dorothy had worn out from repeated plays. Between songs, they talked. Reba asked about Dorothy's life, really listened to the answers, and shared stories of her own. She told Dorothy about her mother, who had also worked multiple jobs to support her children's dreams. She talked about the struggles of her early career, the rejection, the doors slammed in her face, the people who told her she would never make it. "But I had people like you, Dorothy," Reba said. "People who believed in me, who bought my albums even when money was tight, who requested my songs on the radio. You're the reason I have a career, not the record executives or the radio programmers. You, the woman working double shifts who still found joy in music. You're who I sing for." Dorothy was fading now, the excitement and exertion taking their toll. Her breathing had become more labored, and her grip on Rachel's hand was weakening. Rachel knew the signs. They didn't have much time left. Reba noticed it too. She set down her guitar and leaned close to Dorothy. "I'm going to go now and let you rest. But I want you to know something, Dorothy Daniels. Your life mattered. The way you raised your children and grandchildren mattered. The strength you showed every single day mattered. And the love you gave to the people around you, that matters most of all. The world is better because you were in it." Dorothy smiled, tears running down her temples into her white hair. "Thank you, Reba. This was the best day of my life. I can go now. I'm ready." Rachel let out a small sob, but she nodded. She understood. Her grandmother had been holding on, waiting for this moment. And now that it had come, she could finally let go. Reba kissed Dorothy's forehead gently. "You rest now, sweetheart. And when you see James again, you tell him he was a lucky man to have you." As Reba and Kelly prepared to leave, Rachel walked them to the door. She couldn't speak, couldn't form words to express what she was feeling. Reba pulled her into a tight embrace. "You gave your grandmother a beautiful gift by writing that letter," Reba said. "And you're giving her an even bigger gift by being here with her now. That takes courage and love." "Thank you," Rachel finally managed. "Thank you for doing this. You didn't have to, but you did. And it meant everything. We all need grace in this life, Rachel. Your grandmother gave me grace for 40 years by supporting my music. This was just me returning a little bit of what she gave me." After they left, Rachel returned to Dorothy's bedside. Her grandmother's breathing was shallow, but she was smiling. "Did that really happen?" Dorothy whispered. "It really happened, Grandma. Reba McEntire came to our house and sang for you. I'm the luckiest woman in the world. You deserve every bit of luck life can give you." Dorothy's eyes began to close. "I'm so tired, baby girl." "I know, Grandma. You can sleep now. It's okay. I love you, Rachel. You're the best thing I ever did with my life." "I love you too, Grandma. More than you'll ever know." Dorothy's breathing slowed, becoming peaceful and steady. Rachel held her hand, singing softly. The same Reba McEntire songs they had sung together in the kitchen so many times before. And, as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in gold, Rachel thought about miracles and kindness and the ways that music can reach across time and space to connect human hearts in their most vulnerable moments. Reba sat in the passenger seat of the SUV as Kelly drove back toward downtown Nashville. Neither of them had spoken since leaving Dorothy's house. The radio was off, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional swish of passing traffic. Reba stared out the window at the familiar streets, but her mind was still in that small living room, watching Dorothy's face as she sang Fancy. "Are you okay?" Kelly finally asked, glancing over at her. Reba nodded slowly. "I am. I'm just processing." She turned to look at Kelly. "Did you see her face? The way she lit up?" "I did. It was beautiful. That's why we do this, you know? All the touring, the recording sessions, the late nights and early mornings. It's for moments like that. For women like Dorothy, who find strength in 3 minutes of music." Kelly smiled. "You gave her something precious, a memory to carry into whatever comes next. She gave me something too." Reba touched her chest. "She reminded me why I started singing in the first place. Not for the awards or the sold-out shows, but for the connection. For that moment when someone hears your voice and feels less alone in the world." When they arrived at Reba's office in Green Hills, Kelly pulled up the schedule on her tablet. "I managed to reschedule the photo shoot for next Tuesday. The magazine wasn't happy, but they understood when I explained the situation. The ACM board meeting is now a conference call at 5 instead of an in-person lunch. And the production meeting for Happy's Place was pushed back to 4:30. Wikipedia. Thank you for making that work." Reba picked up her phone and saw several missed calls from her fiancé, Rex Lynn. She smiled, knowing he would want to hear about her afternoon. She called him back immediately. People, "Hey, sweetheart," Rex's warm voice came through. "How did it go?" "It was incredible, Rex. One of the most meaningful things I've done in a long time." Reba filled him in on the details: Dorothy's letter, Rachel's devotion, the small house filled with love, and the way Dorothy's face had transformed when she sang. "That's my girl," Rex said proudly. "Always leading with your heart." "I just keep thinking about her," Reba admitted. "About all the Dorothys out there who never get their moment, who work themselves to exhaustion and then just fade away without anyone telling them they mattered. You told her she mattered today. That's more than most people get. I wish I could do more. For everyone who needs it, you do what you can, when you can. That's all any of us can do." After the call, Reba tried to focus on the production meeting for Happy's Place, but her mind kept drifting back to Madison. She wondered if Dorothy was sleeping peacefully. She wondered if Rachel was holding up okay. The weight of what she had witnessed, a woman facing death with grace and gratitude, sat heavy on her heart. Reba. That evening, Reba declined her team's invitation to dinner. Instead, She drove home to her house on the outskirts of Nashville, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat on her back porch watching the sun set over the rolling hills. The November air was cold, but she wrapped herself in a thick blanket and let the quiet surround her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kelly. "Rachel just called. She wanted me to thank you again. Dorothy is resting peacefully." Reba typed back, "Please give Rachel my personal number. Tell her to call me anytime, day or night, if she needs anything." She thought about her own mother, Jacqueline, who had supported Reba's dreams even when they seemed impossible. She thought about the sacrifices mothers and grandmothers make, the invisible labor of love that holds families together. Dorothy had raised 4 children mostly alone, worked 2 jobs, and still found joy in music. That kind of strength deserved to be honored. Wikipedia. An idea began to form in Reba's mind. She picked up her phone and called her manager, Justin McIntosh, at Starstruck Entertainment. "Wikipedia. Reba, what's up? Kelly said you had an eventful afternoon." "I did, and it got me thinking. Justin, how many letters do we get each week from people with stories like Dorothy's? People who are struggling, facing impossible circumstances, who find comfort in music. Hundreds, maybe thousands. We have a whole team that processes fan mail. China Twadiru, what if we did something about that? Not just read the letters, but actively respond to them. Create a fund or a program that helps people who fall through the cracks. Medical bills, housing assistance, grief counseling, whatever they need." Justin was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant undertaking. It would require resources, staff, legal infrastructure." "I know. But Justin, I met this woman today who spent her entire life giving to others and never asked for anything in return. She's dying, and her biggest dream was just to hear me sing. That's all she wanted. What about the people whose dreams are even smaller? The single mother who can't afford childcare? The elderly person who can't pay for medication? We have the resources to help. You already support numerous charities," Justin reminded her gently. "IMDb+1. I know, and I'll keep doing that. But this would be different. More personal. More direct. I want to create something that honors Dorothy's memory. Let me think about how we could structure this. Maybe a foundation in partnership with existing organizations like Safe Haven or Alive Hospice. We could start small and grow it over time." "That sounds perfect. Let's set up a meeting for next week to discuss details." After the call, Reba felt a sense of purpose settling over her. Dorothy's letter hadn't just touched her heart. It had lit a fire. She realized that at 70 years old, with a successful career behind her, the most important thing she could do was use her platform to uplift others. Wikipedia. Meanwhile, across town in Madison, Rachel sat beside Dorothy's bed in the gathering darkness. She had called the hospice nurse, Amanda Fletcher, to check in on Dorothy's condition. Amanda had come by earlier in the evening and confirmed what Rachel already knew. Dorothy was transitioning. Her breathing had changed to the distinctive pattern that signaled the body was shutting down. She was no longer in pain, just drifting in that space between life and death. "Talk to her," Amanda had said before leaving. "Tell her it's okay to let go. Tell her you'll be all right." But Rachel wasn't sure she would be all right. Dorothy had been her anchor, her safe harbor in a chaotic world. When Rachel's mother had abandoned her at age 7, Dorothy had stepped in without hesitation. She had worked double shifts to keep Rachel fed and clothed. She had sat at the kitchen table helping with homework even after 14-hour days on her feet. She had taught Rachel about strength, resilience, and unconditional love. "Grandma," Rachel said softly, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to know something. Today was the most beautiful gift you could have given me. Seeing your face when Reba sang, That's an image I'll carry for the rest of my life. You were so happy." Dorothy's breathing remained steady, but shallow. Her eyes stayed closed. "Reba told me to tell you that your life mattered. And she's right, Grandma. You mattered to me more than anyone else in this world. You saved me. You gave me a chance at a real life when I had nothing. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished. It's because of you." Rachel's voice broke. "But I need you to know it's okay to go now. You don't have to hold on for me anymore. I'm going to be okay. I'm strong because you taught me how to be strong. And I'll never forget you. Never. Every good thing I do in this life, I'll do it in your honor." The house creaked around them, the same sounds Dorothy had heard for 35 years. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The oak tree outside scraped against the window in the wind. Everything was familiar, but everything was changing. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Kelly. "Reba wanted me to give you her personal number. She said to call any time if you need anything." Rachel stared at the number in disbelief. Reba McEntire had given her personal contact information. Even in the midst of her grief, Rachel felt a swell of gratitude. She saved the number, then sent a simple text. "Thank you for today. You gave my grandmother the most beautiful final gift. She's at peace now. Rachel." The response came quickly. "I'm so glad I could be there. Your grandmother is a remarkable woman. You are in my prayers. Call me if you need anything at all. Reba." Rachel set the phone down and returned her attention to Dorothy. She began to sing quietly. "Fancy." Then, "The Greatest Man I Never Knew." Then all the other Reba songs Dorothy had loved. Her voice wasn't trained or beautiful, but it was filled with love. And that was all that mattered. As midnight approached, Dorothy's breathing began to slow. Rachel held her hand, continuing to sing, continuing to tell her it was okay to go. At 12:47 a.m., Dorothy Daniels took her last breath. It was gentle, peaceful, like falling asleep after a long, exhausting day. Rachel sat in silence for a long time, still holding her grandmother's hand. The house felt different now, emptier, despite all the furniture and photos and memories. She thought about calling someone. Amanda, the funeral home, anyone. But instead, she just sat there, letting the reality sink in. Her grandmother was gone. The woman who had raised her, protected her, loved her unconditionally. Gone. But she hadn't died in pain or fear. She had died after experiencing joy, after meeting her hero, after hearing the songs that had carried her through 6 decades of hardship. Rachel had given her that, and Reba had given her that. Finally, Rachel picked up her phone and sent another text to Reba. She passed away peacefully at 12:47 a.m. I was with her. Thank you for making her final hours so beautiful. Even though it was nearly 1 in the morning, Reba responded immediately. I'm so sorry for your loss, Rachel. What a blessing that you were with her. She was lucky to have you. Please let me know about the funeral arrangements. I'd like to be there if possible. Rachel's tears fell onto the phone screen. Reba McEntire wanted to come to her grandmother's funeral. The kindness was almost overwhelming. Over the next several hours, Rachel made the necessary calls. Amanda came back to officially pronounce Dorothy deceased. The funeral home came to transport the body. Rachel's Aunt Jennifer, Dorothy's daughter, drove up from Murfreesboro and helped with the initial arrangements. But through it all, Rachel kept thinking about Reba's kindness, about the way she had knelt beside Dorothy's bed and held her hand, about the genuine emotion in her voice when she sang. As dawn broke over Nashville, Rachel stood in the empty living room where Dorothy's hospital bed had been. The oxygen equipment was gone, the medications cleared away. Soon, this room would return to its original purpose. a space for family gatherings, holiday dinners, ordinary life. But for Rachel, it would always be the place where her grandmother met Reba McEntire and died happy. She walked into the kitchen and made coffee, going through the automatic motions of a task performed thousands of times. As the coffee brewed, she noticed Dorothy's recipe box on the counter, the one filled with handwritten cards for pecan cookies, cornbread, and green bean casserole. Rachel pulled out the recipe for pecan cookies, the ones she had baked yesterday for Reba's visit. Dorothy's handwriting was shaky but determined. James's favorite: bake with love. Rachel decided in that moment that she would bring pecan cookies to the funeral. Dorothy would have wanted that. She would have wanted to feed the people who came to say goodbye, to give them something sweet to remember her by. The sun rose fully, painting the kitchen in soft golden light. Rachel's phone buzzed with messages, friends offering condolences, neighbors asking what they could do to help, her boss at the hospital saying to take all the time she needed. But the message that meant the most was from Reba. Thinking of you this morning. Grief is hard, but love is stronger. Your grandmother's love will carry you through this. Rachel set down her coffee and typed back, "Thank you for reminding me of that. She loved me so much. And because of you, she died, knowing how much she was loved in return." The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday at Connolly Memorial Chapel, a modest funeral home on Dickerson Pike that had served Nashville's working-class families for over 60 years. Rachel had chosen it because Dorothy had attended funerals there for friends and co-workers over the years. It felt right to lay her to rest in a place that was familiar and unpretentious, just like Dorothy herself. In the days leading up to the funeral, Rachel was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Neighbors brought casseroles and flowers. Her co-workers at Alive Hospice organized a meal train. The church Dorothy had attended sporadically, when work and exhaustion allowed, offered to host a reception after the service. But the most unexpected support came from Reba McEntire's office. Alive Hospice Kelly called on Wednesday afternoon. "Rachel, I'm calling on behalf of Reba. She wanted me to ask if there's anything you need for the funeral. Flowers, catering, music, anything at all. She'd like to help." Rachel was sitting at Dorothy's kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, death certificates, insurance forms, bills that still needed to be paid. "That's incredibly generous, Kelly, but we're okay. My aunt and I have it covered." "Are you sure? Reba really wants to do something." Rachel thought for a moment. "Actually, there is one thing. Grandma Dorothy loved flowers, especially sunflowers. They reminded her of summer and happy times. If Reba wants to send flowers, sunflowers would be perfect. Consider it done." And Rachel, Reba confirmed she'll be attending the service on Saturday. "She asked me to tell you she's honored to be there." After the call, Rachel sat in stunned silence. Reba McEntire was coming to her grandmother's funeral. She would be there to honor Dorothy, to pay her respects, to show that their brief encounter had mattered. Rachel felt tears sting her eyes again. She seemed to cry constantly now, but they were tears of gratitude mixed with grief. On Thursday, an enormous arrangement of sunflowers arrived at the funeral home. The card read, "In honor of Dorothy Daniels, a woman of strength, grace, and courage. With love and admiration, Reba McEntire." The funeral director, Michael Harris, called Rachel immediately. "Ms. Bennett, I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. These flowers must have cost over $500. Who is this Reba McEntire?" Rachel laughed through her tears. "She's the queen of country music, Mr. Harris, and she came to visit my grandmother before she died. Well, I'll be damned. Pardon my language, but that's something special." The story of Reba's visit had begun to spread through the community. Rachel's neighbor, Linda Crowley, had apparently told her sister, who told her hairdresser, who posted about it on social media. By Friday afternoon, the local news had gotten wind of the story. Channel 5 called Rachel asking for an interview, but she politely declined. This wasn't about publicity or attention. It was about Dorothy and the kindness of a stranger who turned out to be a friend. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with a persistent drizzle that matched Rachel's mood. She dressed in a simple black dress Dorothy had helped her pick out for job interviews 3 years ago. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw her grandmother's eyes staring back. The same hazel color, the same determined expression. She touched the small gold cross necklace Dorothy had given her for her 18th birthday. "I'll make you proud, Grandma," she whispered. "I promise." The funeral was scheduled for 11 o'clock. Rachel arrived at 9 to make sure everything was in order. The casket was simple pine, adorned with Reba's spectacular sunflower arrangement. Photos of Dorothy covered the memory table. Dorothy as a young bride, Dorothy holding baby Rachel, Dorothy laughing at a family barbecue, Dorothy in her waitress uniform at the diner. A life captured in images. People began arriving around 10:30. Former co-workers from the diner, where Dorothy had worked for 30 years before her health failed. Neighbors from Neely's Bend Road, hospice volunteers who had helped care for Dorothy in her final weeks. Rachel's Aunt Jennifer and her 2 cousins, Michael Daniels and Lisa Chen. The church pastor, Reverend Thomas Wright, a kind man in his 60s who had visited Dorothy several times during her illness. At 10:45, a modest SUV pulled into the parking lot. Rachel watched through the window as Reba McEntire stepped out, wearing a tasteful black suit and minimal jewelry. Kelly was with her, along with a security guard who stayed discreetly in the background. Reba wasn't dressed like a celebrity attending a public event. She was dressed like a friend coming to pay her respects. Rachel met her at the door. "You came." "Of course I came." Reba pulled Rachel into a warm hug. "How are you holding up?" "Some moments are better than others. But I'm surrounded by love, so that helps. That's all we can ask for in this life, to be surrounded by love when we need it most." Reba looked around the chapel, taking in the photos and flowers. "Tell me about these pictures. I want to know more about Dorothy's life." For the next 15 minutes, Rachel walked Reba through the memory table, sharing stories about each photograph. Reba listened intently, asking questions, laughing at the funny stories, wiping her eyes at the sad ones. Other mourners watched from a respectful distance, recognizing Reba but not wanting to intrude on the private moment. At 11 o'clock, Reverend Wright asked everyone to take their seats. The chapel held about 75 people, and nearly every seat was filled. Reba sat in the second row, directly behind Rachel and her family. The service began with a hymn, "Amazing Grace," sung by the church choir. Reverend Wright delivered a heartfelt eulogy, talking about Dorothy's strength, her devotion to family, her quiet faith, and her ability to find joy even in hardship. "Dorothy Daniels lived a life of service," he said. "She served her family, her community, and her God. She may not have had wealth or fame, but she had something far more valuable: a generous heart and an unbreakable spirit." Rachel had been asked if she wanted to speak, but she wasn't sure she could get through it. Still, as the service continued, she felt compelled to stand up and say something. She walked to the front on shaky legs, clutching a piece of paper with notes she had scribbled at 3 in the morning. "My grandmother raised me from the time I was 7 years old," Rachel began, her voice wavering. "My mother couldn't do it, and my father was never in the picture. But Grandma Dorothy stepped in without a second thought. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make sure I had food and clothes and school supplies. She helped me with homework even when she was exhausted. She taught me right from wrong. She showed me what unconditional love looks like. Rachel paused, gathering her courage to continue. A week ago, my grandmother was dying, and I felt helpless. I wanted to give her something meaningful before she left this world. She had always dreamed of seeing Reba McEntire in concert, but life never gave her that chance. So, I wrote a letter on her behalf and gave it to Reba after a show in Nashville. She looked directly at Reba, who was crying openly now. What happened next was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Reba came to our house. She sat beside my grandmother's bed, held her hand, and sang to her for over an hour. She talked with her, listened to her stories, and told her that her life mattered. And because of that kindness, my grandmother died happy. She died knowing she was valued and loved. Rachel's voice broke completely now. I tell you this story because I want you to know who my grandmother was. She was the kind of person who found strength in music, who believed in dreams even when they seemed impossible, and who taught me that kindness matters more than anything else in this world. Thank you all for being here to honor her memory. Rachel returned to her seat, and Jennifer squeezed her hand supportively. The service continued with another hymn, followed by final prayers. As the casket was prepared to be taken to the cemetery, Reba approached Rachel quietly. "Would it be all right if I sang something?" Reba asked. "I didn't want to presume, but if you think Dorothy would have liked it." Rachel nodded, unable to speak. Reba walked to the front of the chapel and asked if someone could bring her guitar from Kelly's car. While they waited, the room buzzed with whispered conversations, people realizing that Reba McEntire was about to perform at Dorothy's funeral. When the guitar arrived, Reba adjusted the microphone and looked out at the gathered mourners. I only knew Dorothy Daniels for a few hours, but in that short time, she taught me something important. She reminded me that music isn't just entertainment. It's connection, comfort, and hope. She told me that my songs helped her survive the hardest times in her life. But the truth is, people like Dorothy, people who keep going despite impossible odds, they're the ones who inspire the songs in the first place. Reba began to play, and her voice filled the chapel with "The Greatest Man I Never Knew," the song Dorothy had requested, the song she had played at James's funeral. Every person in that room felt the weight of loss and love intertwined. When Reba finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. "Rest in peace, Dorothy," Reba said softly. "You were heard. You were seen. You mattered." The procession to the cemetery was somber. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, casting everything in shades of gray. Dorothy was laid to rest beside James in Spring Hill Cemetery, under an old maple tree that would shade them through the seasons. Reverend Wright said final prayers, and Rachel placed a single sunflower on the casket before it was lowered into the ground. Back at the church reception hall, people gathered to share food and memories. Rachel's Aunt Jennifer had made Dorothy's pecan cookies using the recipe from the box. Tables were laden with casseroles, fried chicken, potato salad, and sweet tea, the comfort foods of Southern mourning. People shared stories about Dorothy, laughing and crying in equal measure. Reba stayed for the reception, mingling with mourners, listening to their stories about Dorothy. She didn't act like a celebrity gracing them with her presence. She acted like a member of the community, someone who had lost a friend. She filled plates for elderly guests, helped clean up spills, and sat with Dorothy's former co-workers from the diner, hearing about the woman who had been their colleague and friend for 3 decades. "Dorothy never complained," said Martha Phillips, a 70-year-old woman who had worked alongside Dorothy for 20 years. She came in with blisters on her feet, worry in her heart, bills she couldn't pay, and she still smiled at every customer. She still asked how your day was going. That's character. Reba nodded. That's exactly what came through in her letter. Strength without bitterness. Hope without naivety. She understood that life is hard, but she chose kindness anyway. You gave her something special at the end, Martha said. We all heard about your visit. That was real Christian charity. Doing something for someone who could never repay you. She repaid me more than she knew, Reba replied. She reminded me why I do what I do. She gave me perspective and purpose. I should be thanking her. As the afternoon wore on, people began to leave. Rachel stood at the door, thanking each person for coming, accepting their hugs and condolences. When Reba prepared to leave, Rachel walked her out to the parking lot. I don't know how to thank you properly, Rachel said. For everything. For visiting Grandma, for coming today, for singing, for staying. You didn't have to do any of it. Yes, I did, Reba said firmly. Maybe not in the way society defines obligation, but in the way the heart defines it. Your grandmother reached out to me through that letter, and I reached back. That's how connection works. That's how we survive this hard world, by reaching for each other. She would be so happy knowing you were here today. I'm happy I was here. And Rachel, I meant what I said about calling me if you need anything. I know grief can feel isolating. Don't let it isolate you. Reach out when you need to. I will. Thank you, Reba, for seeing my grandmother, for seeing me. After Reba left, Rachel stood in the parking lot for a long moment, feeling the cold November wind on her face. The sky was darkening earlier now as winter approached. In a few weeks, it would be Christmas. The first Christmas without Dorothy. The thought was almost unbearable. But as Rachel drove home to the empty yellow house on Neely's Bend Road, she thought about the past week. She thought about the letter, the concert, Reba's visit, Dorothy's joy, and the funeral where a country music legend sang for a woman who had spent her life in obscurity. She thought about all the people who had shown up today, proving that Dorothy's life had touched more people than Rachel had realized. The house was dark and quiet when Rachel arrived. She turned on the lights and looked around at the space that still held Dorothy's presence in every corner. The Afghan Dorothy had crocheted draped over the couch, the photos on every surface, the recipe box in the kitchen, the garden visible through the window, dormant now but ready to bloom again in spring. Rachel made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same place she had sat countless times with Dorothy, talking about school, work, life, and dreams. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photos she had taken of Reba's visit. Reba holding Dorothy's hand, Reba with her guitar, Dorothy's face lit up with joy. These were treasures, proof that magic could exist even in the midst of dying. Her phone buzzed with a text from Reba. Home safe. Still thinking about Dorothy and all those amazing people today. Your grandmother built a beautiful legacy. It lives on in you. Rachel typed back, "Thank you for being part of her story. And mine." As night fell over Nashville, Rachel sat in the quiet house, holding her grief like something fragile and precious. She knew the hard days were ahead. The firsts without Dorothy, the moments of forgetting she was gone, the ache that would become a permanent part of her landscape. But she also knew she was stronger than she realized. Dorothy had taught her that, and Reba had reminded her of it. In the end, we are all just trying to be seen, to be heard, to know that our lives mean something. Dorothy Daniels had been seen, and in being seen, she had taught everyone around her about grace, resilience, and the transformative power of simple kindness. 3 weeks after the funeral, Rachel returned to work at a live hospice. Her colleagues welcomed her back with gentle hugs and careful questions about how she was managing. The truth was complicated. Some days she felt okay, functional, capable of moving through the world. Other days, grief hit her like a wave, leaving her gasping and disoriented. But she showed up anyway, because that's what Dorothy had taught her to do. Her first patient back was an elderly man named Robert Patterson, 79 years old, dying of pancreatic cancer. He lived alone in a small apartment in East Nashville, his wife having passed away 3 years earlier. When Rachel entered his apartment for her initial assessment, she found him sitting in a worn recliner, staring out the window at nothing in particular. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Rachel Bennett, your hospice nurse. I'll be checking on you regularly and helping manage your pain and symptoms." Robert looked at her with tired eyes. "You're young to be dealing with death all the time. I'm 28, and I've learned that death is just part of life. What matters is how we spend the time we have." Over the following visits, Rachel and Robert developed a rapport. She learned that he had been a jazz musician in his younger years, playing saxophone in clubs all over Nashville, before settling into a more stable job as a music teacher. His apartment walls were covered with photos from his performing days and framed posters from long-ago concerts. "Do you still play?" Rachel asked during her third visit, while checking his vitals. "Haven't touched my saxophone in 2 years. Hands shake too much now. Besides, who wants to hear an old dying man play?" "I do," Rachel said simply. "Music is healing. Even if your hands shake, even if the notes aren't perfect, the act of playing might bring you joy." Robert looked skeptical, but the next week Rachel noticed the saxophone case had been moved from the closet to the table. The week after that, she arrived to find Robert holding the instrument, running his fingers over the keys. "I've been thinking about what you said," Robert admitted, "about music being healing. I had a good life because of music. Seems wrong to abandon it at the end. It's never too late to reconnect with what you love." As Rachel continued her work with Robert and other patients, she found herself thinking often about Dorothy and Reba. The experience had changed something fundamental in her understanding of compassion. Reba could have simply signed an autograph and moved on. She could have sent flowers with a nice note. But instead, she had shown up, physically, emotionally, completely. She had given her time and presence, the most valuable things any of us possess. Rachel decided she wanted to do the same for her patients. Not just manage their medical care, but really see them, honor their stories, help them find moments of joy in their final chapter. She started asking patients about their dreams and regrets. She helped facilitate reconciliations with estranged family members. She brought music, photos, and memory books to her visits. She sat with people as they died, making sure no one passed alone. Her supervisor, Catherine Morris, noticed the change. "You've always been a good nurse, Rachel, but something's different now. You're even more present with the patients." "I learned something important recently," Rachel said. "I learned that bearing witness to someone's life, really seeing them, is one of the most powerful things we can do. My grandmother taught me that, and Reba McEntire reinforced it." Meanwhile, Reba had been moving forward with her plans to create a foundation to help people like Dorothy. She had assembled a team including Justin, Kelly, and representatives from Safe Haven and Alive Hospice to structure the Dorothy Daniels Memorial Fund. The fund would provide assistance to low-income families dealing with end-of-life care, helping with medical bills, funeral costs, and grief counseling. At the initial planning meeting in mid-December, Reba was adamant about the fund's purpose. "This isn't about me getting good publicity," she said firmly. "This is about honoring a woman who spent her entire life giving to others and died with almost nothing to her name. I want to help people who fall through the cracks of our healthcare system, people who work hard their whole lives and still can't afford basic dignity at the end." The team worked quickly, and by early January, the Dorothy Daniels Memorial Fund was officially established. Reba made a personal donation of $500,000 to start the fund and planned a benefit concert for March to raise additional money. She called Rachel personally to tell her about the foundation. "Reba, I don't know what to say," Rachel said, crying again. But this time, they were tears of joy and gratitude. "You're naming it after my grandmother?" Her story inspired this, Rachel. She represents so many people who deserve better than what our system gives them. I want her name to be associated with compassion and support. She would be so honored, so proud. Will you come to the planning meetings? I want your input as someone who works in hospice care and as Dorothy's granddaughter. Your perspective is invaluable. Of course, I'd be honored. Over the next few months, Rachel became actively involved in the foundation's work. She helped develop criteria for grant recipients, connected the foundation with families in need, and shared Dorothy's story at fundraising events. It gave her grief a purpose, transformed her pain into something that could help others. The benefit concert in March was held at the Bridgestone Arena, with several country music stars donating their performances. Reba headlined, of course, and during her set, she told Dorothy's story to the sold-out crowd of 20,000 people. 3 months ago, I met a woman named Dorothy Daniels, Reba said from the stage. She was 82 years old and dying. She had worked hard her entire life, raised 4 children mostly on her own, and had very little to show for it in terms of material wealth. But she was rich in the things that matter: love, strength, and grace. The arena was silent as Reba continued. Dorothy wrote me a letter explaining that my music had helped her survive the hardest times in her life. Her granddaughter, Rachel, gave me that letter, and it changed me. It reminded me why I became a singer in the first place: to connect with people, to help them feel less alone, to be part of their survival story. Reba's voice grew stronger. Dorothy is gone now, but her legacy lives on through the Dorothy Daniels Memorial Fund. This foundation will help families who are struggling with end-of-life care costs. It will ensure that people like Dorothy can die with dignity, surrounded by love, without the crushing burden of medical debt. Every dollar raised tonight goes directly to helping families in need. The concert raised over $800,000, exceeding all expectations. Media coverage of the event brought additional donations and increased awareness about the challenges facing low-income families dealing with terminal illness. The foundation began making grants within weeks, helping dozens of families across Tennessee. Rachel attended the concert with her Aunt Jennifer. As they sat in the arena watching Reba perform, Jennifer squeezed Rachel's hand. Your grandmother would be beside herself. She'd never believe all this came from her simple letter. She'd probably say it was too much fuss, Rachel said, smiling through tears. But secretly, she'd be thrilled. After the concert, Reba invited Rachel backstage. They sat in the green room, drinking tea and talking about the foundation's progress. We've already helped 15 families, Reba said. One woman was able to bring her husband home from the hospital for his final weeks because we paid for home hospice care. A single father got help with his late wife's funeral costs so he could focus on caring for their 3 kids. Every story reminds me of why we're doing this. Thank you for turning my grandmother's death into something that helps others, Rachel said quietly. It makes the grief more bearable, knowing that good came from it. That's how we honor the people we've lost, by living in ways that reflect their values. Your grandmother valued kindness, generosity, and resilience. This foundation embodies all of that. As spring progressed into summer, Rachel continued her work with hospice patients, now bringing not just medical expertise, but a deeper understanding of what dying people and their families needed. She helped Robert Patterson reconcile with his estranged daughter before he passed in April. She sat with a young mother of 2 as she died of breast cancer in May, making sure the woman's children got to say proper goodbyes. She advocated fiercely for her patients, ensuring they received the pain management and emotional support they deserved. The Dorothy Daniels Memorial Fund continued to grow, helping more families each month. Reba remained actively involved, not just as a figurehead, but as someone who personally reviewed applications and made decisions about grants. She visited some of the families the fund helped, bringing the same presence and compassion she had brought to Dorothy. In late June, Rachel received a call from Kelly. Reba wants to know if you'd be willing to speak at a healthcare conference in August. They're looking for someone to talk about the intersection of hospice care and financial hardship. She thinks your story, and Dorothy's, could make a real impact. Rachel was nervous about public speaking, but she agreed. Standing on a stage in front of 500 healthcare professionals and policymakers, she told Dorothy's story. She talked about the impossible choices families face when someone is dying. Pay for pain medication, or buy groceries, choose home hospice, or pay the rent. She talked about the emotional toll of watching someone you love suffer because the system fails them. And she talked about how one act of kindness from Reba McEntire had sparked a movement that was now helping hundreds of families. My grandmother died happy because someone saw her, Rachel concluded. She died knowing her life had mattered. That's a privilege that should be available to everyone, regardless of income or status. The Dorothy Daniels Memorial Fund is working to make that possible. But we need systemic changes too. We need better insurance coverage for end-of-life care. We need living wages, so people don't have to choose between working and caring for dying family members. We need a society that values people like my grandmother, the invisible workers who hold everything together. The speech received a standing ovation. Several policymakers approached Rachel afterward, asking for more information about the foundation and expressing interest in legislative solutions. One state representative, Amanda Foster, promised to introduce a bill expanding Medicaid coverage for home hospice care. Rachel called Reba that evening to tell her about the response. "I think we might actually be changing things," Rachel said, excitement clear in her voice. "Of course we are," Reba replied. "That's what happens when people with good hearts decide to act instead of just feeling sad about problems. Your grandmother set all of this in motion with one honest letter. She's still changing lives, even from beyond the grave." On a warm August evening, Rachel stood in Dorothy's garden, her garden now. She had kept it going through the spring and summer, planting the tomatoes and zinnias Dorothy had always loved. The garden was thriving, bursting with color and life. Rachel had invited some of Dorothy's old friends over for dinner, wanting to keep her grandmother's memory alive through the rituals Dorothy had cherished. Good food, good company, and stories told with love. As the sun set over Nashville, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rachel thought about the journey from that November evening when she had nervously approached Reba with Dorothy's letter. So much had changed. Dorothy was gone, but her legacy was growing. A foundation in her name was helping families across the state. Healthcare professionals were having conversations about policy changes, and Rachel had found her calling, not just as a nurse, but as an advocate for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. Her phone buzzed with a text from Reba. "Thinking about you and Dorothy tonight. Hope you're doing okay." Rachel smiled and typed back, "I'm in her garden, surrounded by people who loved her, continuing her tradition of feeding people and making them feel welcome. I think she'd be happy. I know she would be. You're honoring her beautifully." As darkness fell and fireflies began to dance among the tomato plants, Rachel's Aunt Jennifer brought out Dorothy's pecan cookies, now a staple at every gathering. The guests shared stories about Dorothy, laughing at her stubbornness, crying at her kindness, marveling at her strength. She was something special, Martha from the diner said. Not because she was famous or rich or powerful, because she was real. Because she kept going when most people would have given up. Because she loved fiercely, even when life gave her every reason not to. To Dorothy, Rachel said, raising her glass of sweet tea. To Dorothy, everyone echoed. And in that moment, in that garden under the summer stars, Dorothy Daniels was there with them. In the flowers she had planted, the recipes she had perfected, the people she had touched, and the legacy of kindness that continued to ripple outward into a world that desperately needed it. Rachel had learned the most important lesson of all. We survive the loss of the people we love by keeping their values alive, by letting their light shine through us, by being the kindness we wish existed in the world. Dorothy had survived 6 decades of hardship through music and determination. Rachel would honor her by helping others survive their hardest times too. The Dorothy Daniels Memorial Fund would help hundreds, maybe thousands of families in the years to come. But beyond the money and the policies and the programs, Dorothy's real legacy was simpler and more profound. She had shown that every life matters, that ordinary people are extraordinary, and that a letter written with love can change the world. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Rachel stayed in the garden a little longer, feeling her grandmother's presence in the warm breeze and the scent of summer flowers. She thought about Reba's words, "We all need grace in this life." Dorothy had lived a life of grace, giving it even when she received so little in return. Reba had extended grace by honoring a dying woman's simple request. And Rachel was learning to extend grace to herself, accepting that grief and joy could coexist, that moving forward wasn't betrayal, but tribute. "Thank you, Grandma," Rachel whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for everything you taught me. Thank you for Reba. Thank you for showing me that love is stronger than death, and kindness is the most powerful force in the universe." The garden offered no response, except the rustling of leaves and the symphony of crickets. But Rachel felt answered anyway. She felt her grandmother's approval, her love, her eternal presence. And she knew that as long as she carried Dorothy's values forward, as long as she chose compassion over indifference, generosity over selfishness, hope over despair, Dorothy Daniels would never truly be gone. She would live on in every family the foundation helped, in every patient Rachel comforted, in every act of kindness inspired by her story. She would live on in the music that had sustained her, in the garden she had tended, in the love she had given so freely. And somewhere, Reba McEntire was living her life knowing that taking a few hours to honor one fan's dying wish had sparked a movement that was changing countless lives. Sometimes the most important things we do are the smallest acts of kindness, the personal gestures that say, "You matter, I see you, your life has value." In a world that often feels cold and indifferent, Dorothy Daniels and Reba McEntire had reminded everyone who heard their story of a simple truth. We are all connected, and we all have the power to make each other's lives a little more bearable, a little more beautiful, a little more filled with grace. That was Dorothy's gift. That was Reba's gift. And now, it was Rachel's turn to pass that gift forward, lighting candles in the darkness, one act of kindness at a time.